What's that sound? What do you know about it? Is it a polar bear? I don't think so. That wasn't a polar bear, was it? Do you know what it is? Let's go ahead and show him. Nope, not a polar bear. That's a beluga whale. Okay, I have another one for you. Are you ready? Let's see if you're on your toes today, guys. Okay, listen real closely. What does that sound like? Maybe that's got to be a polar bear, right? No? No, that's not a polar bear. That's a ptarmigan. Although it does start with a P, like polar bear. That sounds kind of neat. What do you think it is? That's right. Yes, absolutely. That's a polar bear. And why? Because this is Tundra Connections. Hi everybody, my name is Kyle Schutt with Discovery Education. I am so excited to be back with Polar Bears International here up on the western shores of the Hudson Bay in Tundra Buggy 1. This is just a phenomenal place and we're gonna learn a lot today. We're gonna learn about polar bears. We're gonna learn about where they live, what they eat. We're going to learn about how we can help the polar bears and all the other animals in this ecosystem. And most importantly, we're going to learn with you and from you. We have so many questions coming in, and we want you to know how you can interact with us today. So don't forget, right below your viewing window, you should see that chat window. You can go ahead and type your questions there. We, of course, want to hear from you. Please submit those questions. We also, of course, have questions@pbears.org, an email inbox that you can send questions to. So that's questions@pbears.org, because we definitely want to hear from you. And so before we get too far into this, I'd like to introduce my panel. Guys, you're so used to this. Thank you for having me back. Let's start with Elisa McCall, and we have Dr. Stephen Amstrup. Can you guys tell everybody a little bit about yourselves quickly and what your work is up here?
Thanks, Kyle. Yeah, my name's Elisa, and I work for Polar Bears International. I'm one of the scientists up here, and I also help run some of our education programs for teachers and students like you. So I get to come to Churchill every fall and hang out with the polar bears.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Steve Amstrup. I'm the chief scientist for Polar Bears International, and I'm helping with the outreach effort today with Tundra Connections, and other times I give talks various places around the country and write papers and things that are not quite as exciting as talking to you kids.
This is definitely a favorite time of the year for us and for so many of the classrooms that are joining us. And they're here because it's cold outside, guys. In Fahrenheit, let's see, it's supposed to be a high of, I think, maybe 6 or something today and 0 tomorrow. Celsius, you have to help me out. What's that?
I don't know. I know it's below 0. It's
Below
definitely
0.
below freezing out here. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. It's snowing. In fact, the ice has been coming in, so that's exciting for the bears, of course, right? And hopefully we're going to see some live bears here. We haven't had them roaming around this morning, but the winds are pretty blustery, and they're just kind of bedding down right now. But we'll definitely be sharing some bears. So before we get too far into here, I just wanted to give a couple shout-outs. We have so many of you joining from all across North America, really. We've seen, let's see, we have Schiller Steam Academy in Pittsburgh, PA. Hi guys, how are you? Hope you're having a great day. We have folks from California, from Maryland. We're seeing a bus. Remember I showed you this earlier on Twitter,
cool.
using that hashtag Tundra Connections. We have a lot of folks sharing what their classrooms look like. So hi to Shelby Thompson's class. We love your Canada-bound bus. That is just so cute and so unique. So please continue to share with us. What does your viewing experience look like? How are you learning with us today? We love to see those pictures of your classroom. So thank you. And of course, we want to give a little shout out because, you know, before I made it up here, guys, and on my journey, I kind of adopted your mascot. I hope that's okay. This is your Flat Nanook mascot off of your website, right? And I asked a bunch of teachers if they'd be willing to fill one of these out. And of course, it helps with the Save Our Sea Ice campaign and to just share a little bit about where they're from and where they're joining us. So I have a couple of them here. BJ's our producer. He's behind the scenes. He's doing amazing work back there. BJ, if we can bring some of those up, let's just give a little shout out. I know we had Melissa Murray, her 2nd grade class from Olivehurst, California. Thank you, Melissa, and hi to your whole class. We also had Peter Panico and Charlotte Mecklenburg, a 5th grade teacher. Thank you, Peter. Tiffany Mum in Boca Raton, Florida, at Don Estridge High Tech Middle School. We've got Tara Lee Graton in St. Paul, Alberta, Canada. Janine Shields William B. Ward Elementary in New Rochelle, New York. We have Karen Wells from Midland School District in Pleasant Plains, Arkansas. Jesse Erickson also submitted a photo from Grand Forks Public Schools in North Dakota. Leslie Pope tells us she's with over 500 students today. That's pretty remarkable. She's in Wake County Public Schools in North Carolina. Thank you, Leslie, for that. Of course, we also have Laura Mitchley submitted a photo of her students, and she's from Pennsylvania, where I'm from. So thank you so much to all of you that are submitting those questions, and keep them coming, because we definitely want to learn. In fact, that's our goal. We want to answer as many questions as possible. And subtly, guys, I don't know, do you think we can teach them 25 things they don't know about polar bears?
I think we could
We
try.
can probably do that.
Let's ask them to keep track. Okay, this is on you guys. You see if we get to 25 by the end of the time here, because we'll go for about 30 minutes, a little bit past 1:30 Eastern. See if you can keep track. I think we should get at least 3 or 4 just from the sound effects, right? Like, I don't know if they've heard beluga whales before specifically. That's got to be a new one, right? So let's kick things off. We're going to learn about polar bears, and I thought we might do that with one of the fun videos that PBI has already created. It's all about bears with Dr. John Whiteman, who's been up here before, an excellent panelist as well. So let's just kick things off and learn about polar bears by the numbers.
My name is John Whiteman. I'm from the University of Wyoming, and I'm out here on the Arctic tundra with Polar Bears International to talk about my favorite animal, the polar bear. Let's do some numbers. Polar bears are big animals. When they're standing on all 4 legs, they're going to be about 1.5 meters tall, which is much taller than your average 4th grader.
I'm in 4th grade.
When they're up on their hind legs, they can be almost 4 meters tall, which would make them tall enough to be able to dunk a basketball. Polar bears are really big animals, and they're a dimorphic species. That means that there's a big difference between the size of a male and the size of a female. Males can be about 500 kilograms, which is 7 of me, and females are about 300 kilograms, which is 4 of me. And the very biggest bears, the biggest males, they're 800 kilograms, which is 12 of me. That's a whole soccer team plus a coach. Newborn polar bears can be tiny. They might only weigh 600 or 700 grams. That's probably less than a house cat. But polar bears grow really fast. By the time they're 8 months old, they might weigh as much as 90 kilograms. That means in the first 8 months of their life, they've grown 90 times their original size. They've grown from the size of a house cat to be bigger than I am. One of the reasons that polar bear cubs can grow so fast is that the milk they're getting from their mom can be over 30% fat. That's compared to cow milk, which might only be 4% fat, and that's what you and I drink. The annual movement.
I love that. Just thinking about how tall these bears are, the fact that they could dunk a basketball, that means, well, frankly, they're pretty tall up on their hind legs, and that's why we're in these safe tundra buggies, right? So that we can be safe from those bears. But we have a couple props here, and Elisa and Dr. Amstrup, I'm wondering if you can help talk through, because we're getting so many questions about the bears themselves. I thought we got a lot of questions about the fur. I'm wondering, Elisa, can you help us with what is a polar bear's fur made out of, and how does it help them to stay warm?
Sure, so polar bears have fur just like maybe your dog does at home, but they've got really special fur that helps them live in the Arctic. So they've got 2 layers of fur. They've got a very thick, dense layer next to their skin, and that's kind of like wearing a wool sweater. And then they've got these long guard hairs over top, and that's kind of acting like their rain jacket. So they have these 2 layers that keep them warm in the cold, blowy Arctic, and their fur is actually clear and hollow. So they just look white to our eyes, which is pretty cool. But if you look very, very closely, there's no pigment at all in these hairs. And the hollowness helps trap warm air next to the polar bear's body. So that's why they can live in places that are super, super cold when we need to wear many coats and extra layers. Polar bears are happy.
Excellent, excellent. Another question for you, Elisa. And actually this will be for both of you, but Elisa, what's the largest polar bear that you've seen? And then Dr. Amstrup will follow up with you. And this is from Dr. Shoppert's class, so thank you for joining Dr. Shoppert.
Great question, yeah. And Steve's got more experience, so he's probably seen more. Probably the biggest polar bear I saw was in this area, and he was about 1,400 pounds. It was a really large adult male. It was one of my biggest ever. How about you, Steve?
Yeah, and that's about the same. In the Beaufort Sea of Alaska, we were actually weighing the bears, lifting them up underneath a helicopter, and the heaviest bear that we ever actually weighed was 1,400 pounds. There were a couple that we couldn't get up off of the ice, and so they may have been a little heavier, but 1,400 pounds was the maximum we measured.
Wow, 1,400 pounds. I hope you're writing that down for those of you keeping track of our 25 things. Just, hold them to some homework here, a little assignment as they're learning, right? We're getting so many questions here, and it sounds like somebody might know you, Dr. Amstrup. This question is from Mrs. Aoki's second grade class in Hanover Countryside Elementary in Streamwood, Illinois. It sounds like maybe your great niece, Adelaide's in that classroom? Yeah. Adelaide would like to know in her class, what do polar bears eat? And maybe this will help you. I'm not quite sure. I see a claw. I don't know if that's related or not.
Yeah, well, polar bears eat mostly seals. Two species of seals, ringed and bearded seals. And one of the things that you might be wondering is, well, you've seen seals in zoos and they swim really, really fast. How could a polar bear possibly catch them? And they don't catch them in the water. Polar bears catch seals from the surface of the sea ice, with the polar bear walking above the ice and the seal swimming below. And when the seal comes up to breathe, that's when the polar bear can catch them. And one of the things that they use to help catch them is these really sharp claws. If any of you have a house cat at home, you might look at their claws and see that they're very similar, except much smaller than this. And polar bears use these claws to grab their prey so that they can secure it so it doesn't get back into the water and get away.
Excellent. Elisa, can you talk about the food chain? We're getting lots of questions about polar bears, what they eat, and how that's related to the food chain. I think we have an animation to talk about that too.
Yeah, so the Arctic ecosystem is so cool because when you just look outside, it looks white and flat, but it's kind of like an underwater ecosystem. So the Arctic sea ice acts like the soil does in a forest, and there's algae, little plants growing in the sea ice, forming the base of the food chain. And that algae feeds little organisms like copepods, which feed things like fish, which feed the seals, which feed the polar bears, like Steve was saying. So even though it doesn't look like much at first, there's so much going on underwater, and that sea ice is critical, both for polar bears to use to help them catch seals and to support the entire Arctic ecosystem.
Excellent. And we're getting a lot of questions, of course, thinking about elementary school, and lots of the students. Hi, guys. We're so glad you're with us today. Kindergarten, first grade, second grade, right, all the way up to fifth grade and so forth. They're asking a lot of questions and using words that they know, and they're learning about, like carnivores, right? So is a polar bear a carnivore? Jackson just asked that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, polar bears are strictly carnivores, and what that means is that they eat mostly meat, and it's prey animals that they actually catch. So a black bear or a brown bear is called an omnivore, and they do catch some other animals, but they also eat a lot of plant materials, and in some places they might eat fish. Polar bears eat almost exclusively seals, and so they are very clearly a carnivore, living off of the other animals in the ecosystem that they can catch. And they're at the top level of this ecosystem.
Wow. Phenomenal. Thank you. It's so nice to have an expert here. Definitely spent your life committed to science, and we thank you for that and everything that you know for sure, Dr. Amstrup. So speaking of the bears and speaking of where they live, we're getting a lot of questions about, again, where are we here? And I think we have some animations to show exactly where Churchill is, because it's on the western shores of the Hudson Bay. I wonder if you can tell us, Elisa, why is it that Churchill is known as the polar bear capital of the world? Why is it that we're here?
Yeah, so polar bears do need sea ice, as we were saying, but in the summer where we are right now, that sea ice melts completely and polar bears come back to land. But right now, as we're starting to get close to winter, it's getting cold and the sea ice will be freezing up soon, and the polar bears know this. There's a lot of rivers near Churchill that have fresh water, and fresh water is going to freeze a little bit earlier than seawater, which has more salt in it. So the mixing of the excess fresh water along with the really cold water that's coming down into the Arctic from the top of Hudson Bay, there's all these different conditions that make it so that sea ice is forming right near Churchill very early compared to other parts. And the polar bears kind of know this. So right now they're moving up from the coast and they're all starting to gather right around us, and we're able to come here safely and view them as they wait to get back on the sea ice and go eat their food, seals.
Excellent, excellent, thank you. We're also getting a lot of questions about what other foods, do they have other foods other than seals? So you had mentioned a little bit earlier how they use their claws to hunt for seals. This was a fourth grade question from Caitlin. Do polar bears have other food options besides seals?
In some places, polar bears actually can catch beluga whales. You know, you played the sound of the beluga whale and showed some pictures of it very early on in our conversation here. There are some places where polar bears can catch beluga whales, and they occasionally will feed on other marine mammals that have drifted ashore. If an animal dies and drifts up on the beach, they'll scavenge that. On land here, there's really not much for them to eat. Sometimes they'll catch a lemming or a vole, a small animal. They eat the grass a little bit, they chew on the kelp, but for the most part on land, there's not very much that has enough energy for them to maintain themselves. They really depend on things that they catch from the sea, mostly seals, but occasionally a few other things.
Excellent. And to follow up on that, Christy Oxley in British Columbia, their question was not only what do they eat, but are they afraid of humans? So that's kind of interesting, thinking about Churchill being the town not too far off, and there's a lot of people that live here too. I think you guys were sharing with me that the town of Churchill has roughly the same number of people as the polar bear population here.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think it's about 800 or 900, is that right? So are those bears, are they afraid of people?
My sense in being around polar bears is that, like almost all wild mammals, or wild animals for that matter, they tend to be a little bit afraid of things that they don't know about. So if a bear comes upon a person walking around on the tundra or driving one of these buggies, at first they might be a little bit afraid of it, but in their environment, there's really nothing else that they're afraid of. There's nothing else that is preying on them, so their fear might be fairly short-lived. And that's one of the reasons that our tundra buggies here are so high, is that once they see the buggy and they know that it really isn't a threat, then they might start to explore it and come to see us. And we do know that in communities around the north, and including Churchill, that occasionally bears will have a bad encounter with people, sometimes attack people. Sometimes the bears end up being shot, sometimes the people end up being injured. And so those are things that we really have to be aware of living up here in this environment and interacting with the bears. Are they afraid? A little bit, but we also need to be a little bit afraid of them and very cautious in their environment.
Okay. Now, Lisa, here's a question for you, talking about where we are here in this population. This, as you guys have shared with me, this is one of the most accessible polar bear populations. But what are the other polar bear populations? I think we have a graphic to show kind of that there are more than one polar bear population, right?
Yeah, so we are in a population that we call the Western Hudson Bay polar bear population, but there are in total 19 different populations around the world of polar bears. So they live in Canada. 2/3 of the world's polar bears live in Canada, but they also live in Alaska in the US, in Russia, in Greenland, and in Norway. So polar bears live spread out across the Arctic. But you might think that polar bears live at the North Pole, but they tend to not really be there because there's not a lot of food to eat at the North Pole. Polar bears really like it where it's a little more shallow in the Arctic, which means there's more activity, more of the algae and the little creatures that we talked about earlier, the copepods. There's more going on and there's more food there. So we see them, kind of all across the Arctic, but not too many right at the top there.
Okay, so if we can look outside again for a moment, and I don't know
Sure.
if we have any bears out there or not, but I definitely can see that the ice is forming. You can see those dark spots that kind of look like water, and there was water here several days ago, but it's just getting so cold, everything's freezing. And we're getting a lot of questions about, showing that population, there's a lot of water in that area too, right? So can polar bears swim, first off?
Oh yeah, polar bears are excellent swimmers. So they have these big front feet that act like paddles, and their big back feet kind of act like their rudder. And they can swim for long distances, but it takes a lot of energy to swim very long. So while they will do it to go from ice floe to ice floe or ice to land, they don't want to be doing that all the time.
Wow. Okay, so here's a question from second graders in Michigan. Hi, all of you second graders at Monroe Elementary School. We're so glad you're watching. How long can a polar bear hold his or her breath underwater?
That's an excellent question. So polar bears can dive. They've been spotted diving underwater for kelp or seaweed in parts of Norway. And so far on record, the longest that we have a polar bear holding its breath for is 3 minutes and 10 seconds, which is pretty impressive. I can barely do a minute. probably a lot less.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's pretty.
That'll be another test for all of you kids. How long can you hold your breath?
Yeah.
Do that maybe after school. So we don't want any. Don't scare your teachers.
After you write down the
Yeah.
answers to your questions.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. Do you have 25 yet? I'm wondering. You let
Yeah.
us know. You let us know. Well, we're seeing so many questions. Again, thank you for those of you sharing your classroom with us using that hashtag Tundra Connections or emailing those questions to PBears. I'm so sorry. Help me out, Elisa.
Polar bears.
Questions at pbears.org.
Yeah, you got it.
Is what I'm
Questions
trying
at
to
PBears.
say.
Yeah.
Oh
Thanks,
man,
BJ.
we have a good
How
time.
are they supposed to remember the answers if you can't remember the
Oh, I
question?
tell you, luckily we have this great crew, and BJ threw it up on the screen for us, so they can't get it wrong there.
There you go.
But we have so many other questions coming in, and we definitely want to answer a lot of those. So let's just do kind of some rapid
Yeah.
fire. I see Winkler and Little class that's in here. How do they care for their cubs? This is a 5th grade class in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
So polar bear cubs are born in a maternal den that's usually made of ice and snow. And so it's kind of like a little snow cave. And it's in these caves that the mother gives birth to the cubs, and the cave protects the cubs when they're really small from the outside environment. Then once the cubs are big enough, at about 2.5 months of age, once the cubs are big enough to leave the den, then the mother is very careful to make sure they get enough good, really rich milk, so that keeps them warm from the inside. And then if they get cold, you'll see polar bear cubs snuggle up with their mother just like puppies do. So they're very careful mothers. The fathers, they don't pay much attention to the cubs, and they're out wandering around hunting seals and things like that. But the mother bears are really very attentive and very protective. You wouldn't want to walk up on a mother polar bear with her cubs without fearing some serious risk to yourself.
Wow. So related to cubs, Miss Bembridge's class wants to know how many polar bear pups are usually born at once. What was that answer?
Oh, good question. So usually a polar bear mom will have 1 or 2 cubs at once.
Okay.
They can have triplets occasionally, but it's rare and getting rarer in some places like Western Hudson Bay.
Over most of the Arctic, the average number of cubs is about 1.6 or 1.7. But of course, we don't have 6/10 of a cub or 7/10 of a cub. So most of them have 2 cubs. Some of them have 1 cub. The average is a little bit more than 1.
Okay, so connected to that, Clarion Schools, hi, thanks for watching. They wanted to know, do polar bears live in herds?
Well, out here in Hudson Bay is probably, on the shores of Hudson Bay, is probably the closest thing we have to herds of polar bears. Over most of their range and over most of their life cycle during the year, polar bears are pretty independent. The only permanent or seemingly permanent groups are when females are caring for their young, and females keep their cubs with them for about 2 1/3 years. Other than that, there's brief groupings when males and females get together to breed. And then here on the shores of Hudson Bay, as Elisa was describing, when they're waiting for the ice to freeze up, they really gather here. And a photographer that worked up here for years called the gathering of polar bears in Hudson Bay a celebration of bears. Wow. So it's not really a herd, but you can call it a celebration.
Okay, wow, there you go. I think these students are scribbling furiously with all this information. So, Elisa, a couple questions from New Hampshire. This is Mrs. Kilmer's 1st grade class. Hi. They want to know, how fast can polar bears run, and then how fast can they swim?
Oh, so polar bears can run really fast for short periods of time. So they can't run for a long time because they'll overheat, but if they're just sprinting, they can run up to about 30 kilometers an hour. And to put that into perspective, that would be like beating the Olympic champion Usain Bolt in a sprinting competition.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then swimming speed, I'm not sure if Steve knows.
Well, I don't know a measurement in miles per hour, but I'm pretty sure that polar bears can swim faster than the vast majority of human swimmers. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't want to jump in the water and try and swim away from one, because they would almost surely catch you. I suspect that it's in the neighborhood of 4 or 5 miles per hour, the maximum swimming speed. But I don't have an estimate, or I don't have a statistic on that, but faster than us.
Okay. So you guys know a whole lot about bears, and I want to switch a little bit because we're getting a lot of questions about how do you learn about the polar bears? What is it that you do in the tundra to see what their behavior is and to follow those populations and so forth? So maybe, Elisa, can we start with you?
Sure. So one of the things we do, and Steve can also follow up on this, is that we can track polar bears. So there's a couple types of technologies that we can use. We've got a couple examples here. So we can use a GPS collar or a GPS ear tag on males. So we collar the females. We can't collar the males because their necks are too large compared to their skulls. So the males can wear a GPS ear tag. And when polar bears go out onto the sea ice, like we hope they do soon, to go hunt their seals, it's very, very hard for humans to watch what they're doing because they're way out offshore in very dangerous conditions for us. So what we can do is put this GPS on them, and this will tell satellites where the polar bear is moving, and then we can sit at home and download that information. So we can track polar bears from afar, and that sort of information is so important. It shows us where polar bears are moving, when they're moving, who they're overlapping with. It can tell us about their hunting habits and their mating habits. And the better we learn about polar bears, the better we can protect them and the sea ice that they need. So this sort of research is really important.
Now, I don't know about them, but I was listening at the video in the beginning, and it talked about being dimorphic. That was a new vocabulary word for me, so that's probably why the collar doesn't fit on the male, right? Because it's a dimorphic species. They have two shapes, right?
Yeah, the male is shaped differently than the female. Yeah, so not well shaped for this, but this ear tag can fit on males or even the subadult bears, kind of like the teenager bears who also can't wear a collar because they're still growing. So really important technology.
And you can think of this technology like a GPS in your car, that your parents might have a cell phone that has a tracking mode on it where they can plug in the directions to the grocery store and then follow. And this is the same thing for a bear. So you can actually go to the PBI website and see the polar bear tracker and see paths that the polar bears are making out on the sea ice, paths that we know about because of these GPS trackers.
Excellent. And we have so many questions that continue to come in around the topic of how can we help polar bears. I see Kissel Hill, hi Kissel Hill Elementary. They wanted to know what are some things you can do to help bears. Mrs. Ioki's second grade class also want to know, are they having a hard time surviving and what can we do to help them? We also had students back in Charlotte, Mecklenburg. They wanted to know, based on the global warming situation, how long will it be until the Arctic melts? And so I'm wondering, what is it that, what's that situation and kind of where are we and how can we help the polar bears?
Sure, so let's start with that heat trapping blanket animation that we have, and then we can follow up on that. It'll help explain what's going on.
Sea ice in the Arctic is disappearing. Why is this happening? When we burn fossil fuels for energy, we add more and more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Regular carbon dioxide is used and created by normal life processes, like photosynthesis and breathing. But rampant carbon dioxide comes from burning fossil fuels for energy. The excess carbon dioxide builds up like a thick blanket that traps the Earth's heat and disrupts the climate. Too much heat messes with the Earth's climate. A warmer world has lots of consequences. One consequence is a warmer Arctic with less and less sea ice.
Okay, so Dr. Amstrup, what would you add to that? How can we help those polar bears?
So remember, I spoke earlier about how polar bears catch seals from the ice, and a warmer world, because of the heat trapping gases that we're putting into the atmosphere, means there's going to be less and less ice. If we want to save polar bears, we have to stop the warming and we have to save the ice. So there are many things that you can do. One of the most important is talk with your parents. Maybe your parents can help you write a letter to the president or to your congressman or your senator and say, I'm concerned about the polar bears. We need to stop global warming. There's other things you can do around the house. You can travel less by car. If you can ride your bike to the grocery store, if you can turn down your thermostat in your home, keep the house just a little cooler, wear a sweater instead of turning the heat up, and make sure you turn the lights off when you leave the room.
Excellent. Thank you. All such good advice for sure. And so let's just do one last. I'm gonna let you guys think on that. Other things you can do. Elisa, you had some more you wanted to share about the heat trapping blanket and things we can do. Is that right?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of things we can do. BJ's going to pull up some images here for us about some different solutions that we have. So we have to protect polar bears from being harmed by climate change, and this means safeguarding the sea ice they depend on. And the key is moving toward energy sources like solar that don't add to that heat-trapping blanket effect. It's important that we look for ways we can help make a difference in our communities. So you could ask your school officials to set the thermostat up or down, depending on the season, by at least 2 degrees. You could also compete with other nearby schools to see who can reduce energy consumption the most. Talk to your parents and your friends' parents about getting something like designated bike lanes on more roads, and you could even organize a bike bus to get yourselves safely to school and camp without relying on cars. So many people are joining together in communities around the world to do things that use less of the types of energy that burn fossil fuels. And even in Churchill, we run a couple of our polar bear camps on solar and wind power. These are all great steps towards protecting the sea ice that polar bears depend on, and it's the right thing to do for them, for our planet, and for the future protection of us all. And we want to make sure that all of you have polar bears around for your entire lives and for the next generations too.
Absolutely, and if I can weigh in here,
Please
I
do.
think that what I would encourage them to do is continue to find experiences like this, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many great opportunities to even be within your class or after school students and being able to research polar bears and research the important things that are happening. We know that so many of you, the students, we see the things that you create in your classrooms all the time, whether you're using tools like Board Builder from Discovery Ed and things like that. But also teachers, if you're interested, we want you to continue to reach out. Polar Bears International has phenomenal resources. We hope that you saw lots of the PowerPoint presentations, the lesson plans, the unit plans, the media that you all have to share so that they can bring that back and weave that into what they're learning and what they're doing in their classrooms. And of course, now is amazing because it's live. But if you're learning about animal adaptations, you're learning about ecosystems or habitats, whatever it might be, there's always ways that you can bring this message to the fold, right? And then, of course, there's so many great ideas being shared, and thanks to all the educators in the Den Online community that continue to share their inspirational resources, their lesson plans, their ideas for how they're bringing this content to life. So thank you to all those teachers that are doing that. So here's a rapid fire session, guys. We're going to go maybe take 1 minute, answer as many questions as we can, and then we're going to have to wrap. Because believe it or not, our time is almost over. And I don't like this part of the webcast, but it happens every time, and you can continue to watch. PBI has the Explore cams. You can visit us. But let's do a quick rapid session. So see how quick you can answer, okay? So here we go. Julie Frone wanted to know, do polar bears have good hearing? Elisa?
Yeah, pretty good. A little better than humans.
Okay,
Compared with dogs.
very good. Dr. Amstrup, Chris Class wanted to know, what's the lifespan of a polar bear?
Average lifespan for females is probably in the early 20s, 23, 24, maybe up to 25, and for males, 17, 18. Males live a little bit less time than females do.
Okay, are we at 25 yet? We better be. If not, here comes a couple more. Right back to you again. How about, this was one on Facebook from a first grader in Michigan. Do polar bears have blubber?
Polar bears have fat under their skin, but they don't have blubber. Blubber is a special kind of a fatty tissue that we find only on whales and seals.
Excellent. Okay. How long do scientists keep the collars on the polar bears? That's from Ontario, a grade 3 class.
Yeah, the collar is programmed to fall off on its own after about 1 year.
Okay, and about how many trackers do you put on each year?
In this area, we put up to 10 to 13 collars out every year, and then up to 20 GPS ear tags per season.
Okay. Wow.
Depends.
That's impressive. And you know what? I can't believe we answered this many questions. If they didn't learn 25 things, they'll have to rewatch this again, right? There's nothing wrong with that. You can definitely do that. But while we wrap here, we definitely want to bring your attention to some pretty cool things that PBI is doing if you'll help them out. They're always looking to make these webcasts better, and they really want your feedback, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, they definitely want your feedback. So if you download, where did it go, Lisa? Here it is. If you go ahead to the survey, to the URL on the screen there, you can go ahead and complete the feedback survey and get one of these very, very cute Be Aware polar bear coloring books, right? There it is on the screen, yeah. Yeah, I'll tell you what, if you had colored pencils or crayons on board, I would have been coloring this over the last couple days, but you know,
do.
I might, you do? And
There,
you
I
didn't-
hid them.
Okay, join us tomorrow. Maybe I'll fill in one of these for tomorrow's webcast. So go ahead and fill out that survey, and you can get one of these coloring books. And also, I don't know if you saw one of our cuddly little buddy over here. See if I can get him out of the armrest. But you're giving away a couple of these, aren't you?
We are. So you'll be entered into a draw to win one of 3 cupboard options for your classroom, which is pretty cool. And if you do get a cupboard option, we would love if you would take a picture of it with your class. So please do take the feedback survey. It helps us make our content better and keep connected with all of you.
Okay, perfect. Well, first off, we want to thank all of you for joining, for taking the time out of your busy days to learn about the polar bears. And there's so much more. This is just the start of your learning experience. And we want you to know that time still remains for saving polar bears and their sea ice habitat. We can work together to reduce CO2, to save energy, and really to influence where our energy comes from. So one of the most important things you can do, as we've already mentioned, is take an action on climate, right? Go ahead yesterday, hopefully, if your parents, you encourage them to go out and vote, right? But you can go ahead and do more than that. You can vote with your purchases, right? The things that you buy. And if you're a student or teacher, make sure you take a look at Polar Bears International's Get Involved section of their website, because they have a whole lot of ideas for you there. So to wrap up here, we just want to thank Frontiers North Adventures, Explore.org, and Canada Goose. And thanks to each of you for wanting to learn with us, for joining us today out here on the shores of the Hudson Bay. It's pretty cold and it's wintry, but you know what? We had a great time with you in here, and we hope you have a great afternoon. Any last words you guys like to say?
I'd say thank you for logging in, and keep thinking about the polar bears. If we save the polar bears, we'll all be in a better place.
Yeah. Echoing Steve, thank you all for your passion for polar bears, and we're all going to work to keep them in the Arctic forever together.
And I personally can't wait to see your viewing experience. Share those pictures with us. We'd love to see just how you participated today. Have a great afternoon, everybody. See you later.